Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline Update for the 1st of May 2024. Pinch and a punch for the first of the month, no returns, as I often say. Right, I didn't do my mapping update last night because I was out all night from quite early on. Interesting that some Egypts who are pro-Russians like, oh, you didn't do your mapping, is that because it's convenient not to do it, blah, blah, blah. I never don't do my mapping, and I didn't know what's happened on the front line, so don't say I don't do my mapping because it's like bad news from the front line, you absolute Egypts. Anyway, I think it's William Morris or some numpty like that. Anyway, I have actually added to what JR did last night. So JR sent me the mapping, I was out, and actually there's been some changes already to the front line in a couple of places, so it's fairly dynamic is the point. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key to the map on your screen at the moment. Pause the video. We'll go to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatovo to Kreminna. Up here, as you can see, there are pins in a number of places, and most of them are red and deep orange, which means that the Russians have made advances. We go to Kupiansk, where we have seen an uptick in activity. This has been a really stable axis for a long time now, and there is now quite a bit of movement or activity in both the Kotelyrivka, Kislivka area, and also Tabaivka and around there, as according to Surat Maps, at least a pro-Russian mapper. We're going to pop into, first of all, the Euromaidan Press. He says, basically, after a lull to regroup, Russian troops have completed rotation and resumed offensive operations, conducting multiple assaults on the Kupiansk to Liman sectors, according to Kharkiv Oblast head. So, Russian invasion forces have renewed offensive operations targeting Ukrainian defensive positions in the Kupiansk and Liman axes in Kharkiv Oblast over the past 2 days. This is according to Oleh Sinyebov, head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, who added that this follows a 2-month period where the Russians focused on rotating and replenishing units that had suffered losses and a degradation of combat capability due to the effective efforts of the Ukrainian armed forces. This is something of a worry. If the Russians have had a chance to rotate their troops in the area, and the Ukrainians probably haven't, given their issues with mobilization, then this might suggest a challenging time ahead for the Ukrainians on this axis, as well as other places on the front line. So apparently, once the Russian military had executed sufficient unit rotations, brought in replacements and conducted training and coordination, they proceeded to launch a new series of assault efforts. The official reported 5 assaults on the Kupiansk axis and nearly 15 on the Liman axis on the 29th, followed by 9 more assaults in the Kupiansk direction on the 30th, while the Liman front was calmer. He assessed that the Russians are testing and probing Ukrainian defensive positions, likely aiming to identify potential weaknesses to exploit in future operations. He stated that troop numbers in the Kupiansk area are similar to approximately 10 months ago, when their last major assault operations began, with an estimated 100,000 total forces, including around 50,000 combat troops. So that's in probably this whole area around here, 100,000 troops. A lot of those will be trainers, logistics, maintenance, and HR and all sorts of types of troop, 50,000 being combat troops, which is obviously a challenging number of troops. Additionally, the Russian military has maintained a force of 20,000 troops in the northern part of the Kharkiv region, with no changes to troop levels reported on this front for approximately 10 months, according to the local administration chief. So the Ukrainians have done a really good job stabilizing attacks in the Sinkivka area, but it could be that they're just probing in a number of places, trying to find any weaknesses. And as you can see here, all the mappers agree that there have been some gains for the Russians in the Kislivka direction. Here we have Surat Map saying, during the last 2 days, the Russians made small advances on the western part of Kislivka and south of the locality in the direction of Kotelyrivka, which is here. So that is certainly challenging for the Ukrainians there. Then we will go to where next? Okay, we'll go down to the here west of Kreminna on the way to Tulsky, Terny, Yampalivka, this kind of area, the Zherebets River there, and these water features, the large sort of lakes and whatnot. We have some good news that the Ukrainians have actually regained some area there. I think we had that indicated by Andrew Perpetua the other day. This could be Surat Maps catching up. During the last 2 days, the Ukrainian army continued its momentum and recaptured new positions east of Yampilivka. Well, it might have been actually Surat Map saying that there was having 2 lots of Ukrainian gains there. So who knows? Anyway, sorry. Words are going to be difficult today due to self-imposed, self-inflicted damage on my brain. Too many pints of black sheep in the pub. Yeah, never going to be an easy day today, is it? Right. I will stagger on, both physically and mentally. We come down past the Seversk front line to Chasiv Yar area, and west of Bakhmut, we have some advances for the Russians north of Ivanivska on this Mount Baba area, this higher ground south of the Canal micro-district. If you remember, Surat Maps corrected their mapping to show that the Russians hadn't quite gained hadn't quite gained control of this urban area, but they are advancing to the south in this nature reserve area and along this forest line here as the ground rises up north of Ivanivska, as I've said. So if we have a look at the 3D rendering of this area, you can see that they are moving along the ground that rises up to being higher ground there, but actually in the forest beneath that too. So depending on which map you are believing here, the Russians could be advancing on the lower ground but not yet on higher ground. Surat Maps has them on the higher ground too, advanced to quite a fair distance through that wooded area, and then on the lower ground really far along here up to the canal, which is very different to what the other mappers are suggesting. Now, this could be a claim that's resultant on some possibly controversial claims that we can see in this argument between, in fact, it looks exactly like that, this argument between Julian Ropka and Andrew Perpetua. So, Julian Ropka says Russian invasion forces crossed the Chasiv Yar Canal 1 kilometre southeast of the town. It is now just a question of time before they enter the settlement either from the east or from the south. This is a big claim. So they've kind of crossed the canal, got some purchase there, much further on from where it looks where the Russians had more consolidated control. Julian Ropka goes on, so he's a journalist for the Bild newspaper, the tabloid newspaper in Germany, and often gets a bit of a hard time for some of his claims. Anyway, as some funny NAFO fellow accuses me of not sharing, sorry, I will pause that because that looks like that is going to be inappropriate. Of not sharing, as I do many times under source video every day. Here it is, plus the official text. Operators of the attack drones of the 18th Slavic Brigade of the NSU work on enemy infantry by dropping ammunition. So his claim is that they have crossed, the Russian invasion forces have crossed the canal. Andrew Perpetua goes hard on him. He says, "You would be a better journalist if you quoted your sources and included their caveats, but instead you make a fool of yourself constantly. I quote my sources every day. Interesting, you don't seem to notice, but only hook in when you see a chance to discredit me. But again, whatever makes you feel better and enjoy the Twitter fame." Anyway, continues. I think it's important to lay this out because I rely a lot on Andrew Perpetua, and he's quite exacting in his criteria for making changes to his mapping. So did you quote the person who geolocated the footage and offered the original analysis? No, because you prefer to make it sound like you did the work and replace actual analysis with your uneducated opinion. I think Andrew's getting a bit touchy here because it's his team that did the geolocation. Julian Ropka says, "I geolocated the footage myself and did the analysis myself, as I do every day. All you do is accusing me of something you just invent to me to make me look bad without any evidence, whatever, have a nice day." This is where it gets, I'm not just reading this to you because, oh, look at a Twitter spat, but actually here's the important information. Yeah, okay, right, let's both pretend that's true. If you did the analysis yourself, why didn't you state the fact that there were no Russian soldiers, not even one singular soldier in the video?
Why did you leave that part out, Mr. Genius Analyst? Also weirdly convenient that a video that came out yesterday you only managed to get around to geolocating after Gick, who's one of Andrew's team members, posted the location a little while ago, but again, let's pretend you really are the genius you pretend to be. And then someone else, Martin Tutera, who's a pretty good OSINT source, by the way, says, in fact, a Russian infantry patrol was bombed while hiding down the pipes around the Chasiv Yar channel, but this sounded much less dramatic, so you posted crossed, and just a question of time, shared a video. So there's a couple of people having a go at him saying, actually, no one has crossed. There's some people who, and Git gets involved as well, there's some people, some Russians who were hiding in pipes around there and then got bombed. The point being that if Suriyat Maps is basing that that change in the mapping on this kind of evidence, then it's highly unlikely that the Russians have either crossed the canal or even have robust control over this land all the way up to the canal. And I say that because this is important. I mean, they probably will gain that land. They probably will take that. They probably will take all of Chasiv Yar, right? But they aren't there yet, and I think it's probably a little bit disingenuous to say that they have control over all this land. It's almost certainly grey zone, and the Ukrainians are active with their drones, hammering any Russian that does indeed get into those places at all. So anyway, just a little bit of context over those claims. Suriyat Maps says the Russian army made new advances south of Mount Baba and reached the water channel in the Axis for the first time. Meanwhile, clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place in the last part of this mount, so the higher ground to the north. But yeah, we'll see whether they, I mean, as I say, it probably is the case that the Russians will take that ground. It's just that they don't yet control it, I would have thought. Right, then when we come down further to the south, we get to Avdiivka, where it is pretty dynamic. And by that, I mean the Russians are doing a good job of taking territory. No doubt losing quite a few troops and pieces of equipment in the meantime, but this is a calculation they seem to see as beneficial. Right, we have Suriyat Maps showing some large gains in the area of Novokonyovo, with Andrew Perpetua showing some gains, and Deep State Map a few changes as well. All in all, the Russians are making gains around Novokonyovo, and they are making gains further out northwest from Ocheratina or Ocheratina, on the way to Novo-Alexandrivka. This is all becoming a little bit sort of worrying that they are still continuing to advance in that direction. There are claims that the Ukrainians don't have large fortifications around here where they really should have. I'm not sure of the situation with regard to Ukrainian fortifications in this area. And some gains around the village of Solovyove as far as Suriyat Maps is concerned, and to the south as well. So let's have a look at some of these claims, and actually we're going to look at quite a bit of analysis from Suriyat Maps. So the breach of Ukrainian defenses in Ocheratina has produced a situation of confusion in the Ukrainian command, which is unable to stop the Russian advance. The capture of Ocheratina is very reminiscent of the capture of Popasna, which allowed the Russian army in 2022 to advance towards Bakhmut, Soledar, and the bastions of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. What is expected after the capture of the new bastion by Russian forces around Ocheratina? There is a high area that runs along the railway and extends towards the north. Taking this and the latest advances in the area into account, we can predict that Russian advances would develop as follows. So then we go into some larger analysis. So let's remember what's happened on the map. He's talking about advancing north along the railway line, along the higher ground towards Novo-Alexandrivka there. And you can see that Solovyove and Novokonyovo have these areas of Russian advance. So the analysis that Suriyat Maps gives here, well, before we go on to the larger, longer analysis, so the Russian army advanced west and south of Solovyove towards Sokil and Novopokrovska, respectively. In addition, troops continued the advance northwest of Ocheratina, taking control over new plantations adjacent to the eastern outskirts of Novo-Alexandrivka. Moreover, Russian forces took full control over Keramik, following withdrawal towards Arkhangelsk, and increased the Ukrainian withdrawals, that is, and increased the pressure over the central trench system, which is almost surrounded. So that is in this area there. Okay, Surak says, pro-Russian source, so take it with a pinch of salt. But the analysis is, the Russian army will continue advancing westwards towards Porez. So this is at number 1, so that's there. So this is that northern Ocheritina. They're also trying to make towards that road to interdict the road I was talking about. Anyway, he says, where it will continue to maintain its positions, the capture of this town will allow control fire to be established on the Ukrainian troops located east of Kharkivska Reservoir. So just to let you know where that is, we have, is that this reservoir here? I think so. So Porez is this area there. So I'm not sure where Kharkivska Reservoir is. It might be the one further to the south. But anyway, talking about moving towards Porez from the east here in that westerly direction, as well as moving northwest. We'll talk about in a second to that road. Which will hinder Ukrainian logistics in this area, which will withdraw. The Ukrainians will withdraw as Russians continue to advance along that axis. So that is towards Porez and towards Zelane there. So that is over here in that direction. That could be the reservoir they're talking about, actually. The Kharkivka Reservoir there. And then continues. Simultaneously, Russian troops will advance along 2 major axes. The first of them will be the road junction located on Highway H32, which connects Pokrovsk with Konstantinivka. So that's going to be here, Pokrovsk to Konstantinivka. So it's going to be there. This will be a serious blow to the arrival of reinforcements and supplies to the second city, as Pokrovsk is the epicenter of the Donbass, leaving only the road to Kramatorsk as the main logistical route. The second of the advances will be towards the north, targeting the town of Kalanyove. That is over there. So that is moving from sort of Keramik and Novokonyove here, north, as well as from Ocheritina north too. It is expected that these advances will allow the reopening of the H20 highway axis, taking the town of Alexandropil and Pantelemonivka. So that is to say that they are going to take Kalanyove there. These 2 places, Alexandropil and Pantelemonivka, as they move northwards. If we go to the final bit of analysis, after Kalanyove, Russian advance will continue northwards, reaching the town of Zoria. So that is, to give you that on my map, we have Zoria up here. It's along this road they'll seek to move, I would have thought. The natural barrier of the Kleban-Bik Reservoir Lake will prevent Russian troops from advancing further due to the danger that the Ukrainian army could easily bombard them from Konstantinivka. The situation must be unblocked by advancing along the H32 highway located in the high area. At the same time, the Russian forces consolidate and expand control over the highway crossing at number 2. So this is interdicting that highway and then moving up the highway. This is how Surat Map sees it happening. This advance will possibly be the most complex given the extensive defences that the Ukrainian command has been preparing there for months. Since its capture would mean reaching the southwestern outskirts of Konstantinivka, these advances would leave Ukrainian agglomerations of Toretsk, New York and Sherbinivka in a kind of semi-encirclement in which only one supply route would remain. The capture of Chasiv Yar in the following months by the Russian army would leave Ukrainian troops in a critical situation at a time when Russian troops would surely begin to attack New York, pushing them from the defensive lines of 2014. So in other words, as they push up here, they will interdict this highway, move up the highway towards Konstantinivka, probably move up this road as well. And then if they take Chasiv Yar, move down here, and that will render New York and Toretsk very vulnerable because their supply lines might be themselves interdicted, and they would approach something like an operational encirclement to some degree, at least, north and south. It will leave this sort of corridor only open that goes right back to Konstantinivka. So that could be what the Russians achieve. It depends how well the Ukrainians go about defending this area now, whether they are in free fall at the moment and in some kind of operational withdrawal. But if they don't have the larger fortifications built back here already, then they could be in trouble, because it might be that they've had to build their fortifications much further back to protect the excavators and the teams and the contractors from being hit by Russian drones. So it could be that the defenses are much further back nearer Pokrovsk rather than over here, much nearer where the front line is presently. And that would mean that the Ukrainians would effectively concede a whole load of territory, and this road might likely be indeed interdicted as claimed. Right, then when we come further to the south, we come to Krasnohorivka, where to the east of Krasnohorivka, we have Andrew Perpetuan Deep State Map having the Russians making gains, moving west from Staromikhailivka. Krasnohorivka itself has inside the town some advances by the Russians to the west of the town, but there's a big difference between the mappers there. So take that with a pinch of salt. It's likely going to be just a very big grey zone there with attacks going on all the time. Probably Russians pushing, Ukrainians hitting them with drones predominantly. Hopefully the Ukrainians will see that Western supply coming through to the front lines pretty soon in terms of ammunition, artillery ammunition, so they can gear up their artillery pieces again to rain some lead down on the Russians. In the meantime, the Russians are going to make advances. So, while you can look at this analysis, and I guess the silver lining for the Ukrainians, or the hope for the Ukrainians, is that the Western equipment will put a stop to this. They're able to do these larger advances at the moment because they're not getting hammered by artillery. But as soon as the Russians are hit by cluster munition, mortar shells, and normal conventional artillery shells, that this will be a whole different kettle of fish for them. The problem that the Ukrainians have is mobilization. They desperately need boots on the ground, and listening to Ukraine the latest yesterday is a real challenge. They're going to really struggle to get people from abroad. People that were interviewed by Ukraine the latest yesterday said, yeah, there's no chance of us coming back to Ukraine type thing. A lot of people not happy with the mobilization rules. It's a real headache for the Ukrainians, that one. Right, we are going to come down past Velika Novosokha to Robotyne, where the claims are that there are several claims that Robotyne has fallen, that the Ukrainians have lost the town to the Russians. As you can see here, Surat Maps is claiming that most of the town is under Russian control. Andrew Perpetuan not quite so bold in those claims, still grey zone around what I call the alien's head, but Russians certainly pushing on further. Here we have Ukrainians shelling with cluster munitions, so that's interesting that they do have cluster shells in this area. Whether they're left over or new ones, who knows. If we go back to here, a post from Tom Bike, we have Robotyne situation annotated on today's satellite image. Russia recaptured the town, pushing Ukrainian forces to the trenches north of the town, is the claim from this source. Trenches at red dotted lines nearest is only 500 meters from a blue-red circle marking a flag position. So the idea is that the Russians have put a flag is somewhere around here, which is probably why Surat Map has moved that front line up to here, and then here we have north of the town some trench lines that seem to curve down there actually, and it's the Ukrainians have pulled back to that position. So it could be that most of the town is indeed not under Ukrainian control, that they have withdrawn largely from Robotyne. So it's been a long time in coming, and I'm amazed it's taken this long for the Russians to push the Ukrainians out of there. I would have thought this would have happened right early on after the end of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, but actually they have held on there for a long time. But it could be that the writing is on a wall for the Ukrainians in that whole sector, really. And that's the front line today. So mainly bad news for the Ukrainians. Russians are making gains in a number of places. This, as I've said to you a number of times, this is the absolute optimal time for the Russians to attack and make as much ground as possible. I think it's going to be increasingly more difficult for them to make ground with attrition if it remains high for the Russians, and also the Ukrainians getting hold of hopefully HIMARS ammunition, artillery ammunition, so on and so forth, and that will allow them to stabilize the front line and then hit Russian logistics and troop accumulations. But we shall see. Who knows? It could be that the Russians have just a numerical advantage over the Ukrainians that will allow them to continue pushing, and in the absence of a large-scale mobilization for the Ukrainians, that is going to present a continual problem for them. Anyway, on to doing the news updates now. I'm behind today, apologies, but thanks very much for tuning in and watching this. Please like, subscribe and share.